Welcome to the Wildlife Podcast with me, Laurel Neme, and my amazing colleague, Jeffrey Barbee. Together, we explore our amazing world, highlighting some of the most accomplished conservationists, scientists, and protectors of our wild places. Today, we're speaking with Joe Cutler, a self-described fish geek and explorer of lakes and rivers across Africa. Now, technically, he's a freshwater ecologist, and he's led expeditions down numerous African rivers to explore, catalog, and describe what's there. So welcome, and let's just get into it. Tell me, how did you get interested in fish in the first place?
Well, thanks, Laurel. Thanks, Jeff, for having me. I've kind of always been into fish. I grew up in a family of fishers, and I think the thing that really hooked me about fish is their diversity. There are over 30,000 species of fish, and they come in every shape and size that you can imagine, and even some things you cannot imagine. So I think that's one of the really cool things about fish. And for me, one of the other things I love about studying fish is kind of the unknown. Every time you pull your net in a new river system or in a new lake, you have no idea what you're going to catch. And so as that net is coming into the shallows and you see the first bits of flashes of color and fish moving, you start identifying what you've got. And there's nothing more exciting than pulling a fish out of a river and saying, I have no idea what this is. It feels like you get that aha moment of science, but you get it all the time studying fish. So I think it's really exciting. And with all the diversity out there, there's no way that you're going to see everything in a single lifetime. So you just have the chance to continue exploring as long as you want to go into the fish world.
That's amazing. And where have you just come back from? What's your most recent trip?
Yeah, so I just came back from the Central African Republic. I was in Eastern CAR studying the Chinko River, and this is a tributary of the Ubangi in the Upper Congo Basin, and it is a really extraordinary river system. It is, in my opinion, one of the most intact and pristine river systems in Africa. So to have the chance to study a river system like that, to access a river system like that is incredible. And we had the chance to do the first big ichthyological survey, the first big study of the river system and its fish diversity ever. So lots of what we got out there.
That's amazing. But wait, I'll have to come back to that because I think Laurel has a couple of questions that we'll need to tee up for that. But the most impressive ichthyological study of its kind is something that we're really interested in. So let's put a pin in that.
What's incredible about fresh waters is they're relatively poorly studied. We know about as much as we do about fresh waters as we do the bottom of the ocean. So,
really?
Yes.
I mean, that's sort of astounding because freshwater, it's physically closer to us, like lakes and rivers, as opposed to the wild blue ocean. But on the other hand, as you were describing what appeals to you about fish, I actually was thinking, wow, I always thought of the ocean ecosystems as this weird, wonderful place where I'm never a part of because I live on land. But the freshwater systems are that too.
Yeah, it's really incredible. Everybody's got a stream in their backyard, and yet still we are discovering new species. In North America, where you think we know everything, right? You think we would know every vertebrate species in North America. 10% of the freshwater fish are thought to be undescribed. Now, if you think about the Amazon or the Congo Basin, you imagine 25% of the species are potentially undescribed to science. So there's a lot of discoveries to make. And what's interesting about the ocean, if you have a big ROV or a submersible, you send it down to the bottom of the ocean to study those areas. So the bottom of the ocean is actually more well studied than the middle of the ocean. That range of 300 feet to the start of the abyss is actually poorly studied because nobody wants to take their submersible only half the way it can go. They want to go right down to the bottom. So there are habitats that are maybe less well explored, but if you can compare a river to the bottom of the ocean, it's kind of extraordinary how little we know about these ecosystems.
What attracted you to freshwater ecosystems versus like ocean ecosystems?
Yeah, freshwaters I think are really important. For one, they're very accessible. If I want to go out and study a river system, I don't need a 200-foot-long research vessel equipped with submersibles. You can go out there in a canoe with your tent, and you can be on that river studying it for a while. So, for one, it's very accessible. It's lovely. I love rivers and lakes. It's an incredible place to spend your time as a scientist. But more generally, freshwater ecosystems, there are 4 things about them that make them really important. They're extremely rare. So while we do all have a stream or lake in our backyard, freshwater ecosystems, our rivers and lakes, only cover 0.1% of the Earth's surface. So it's an incredibly tiny habitat when you look at its global distribution. It's also unbelievably diverse. So that little tiny bit of our planet has as many fish species as all of our oceans combined. So when you look at the diversity of fishes, over 30,000 species, almost half of them live in fresh water. So in terms of diversity, we've got a quarter of our world's vertebrate species living in 0.1% of our planet.
Wow, that is just like, it's mind-boggling.
It is incredible. It is incredible, and there's lots of reasons why that diversity is so high. There's a lot of isolation in fresh waters versus an ocean system that's potentially globally connected. There are species of fish in the oceans that live all around the planet, but there are species of fish in fresh water that live in a single elephant footprint in the rainforest. The entire known range for the species is 1 footprint. So there are so many opportunities for things to get isolated and then evolve and diverge over time that these freshwater ecosystems globally should be considered a biodiversity hotspot.
That's incredible. And if you were going to tell our listeners a little bit about, and Laurel asked about how you got into this, but where do you work and who do you work for?
So right now I work for the Wilderness Project. And it's a nonprofit organization that studies river ecosystems in Africa. And it's kind of a spin-off of the National Geographic Okavango Wilderness Project. So I'm working alongside Steve Boys, one of the really well-known African freshwater conservationists. And we are expanding kind of beyond the Okavango Basin to survey Africa's great river system. So for the last 3.5 years or so, I've been leading transects down the Zambezi, Okavango, Congo, and a lot of coastal watersheds as well. But before that, I've spent 16 years now tromping around sub-Saharan Africa studying fish.
That's amazing. And I mean,
and you still like it.
It's
I still like it.
But I'm honored to count Steve among my friends. That's so exciting that you've been able to work with the Okavango Wilderness Project as well. And it's great that was the genesis of the current project going forward.
Yeah, it's really exciting stuff because I think, I had been kind of doing my own thing in Central Africa long before I met Steve. I'd been working in Cameroon and Gabon. I did my PhD work in Gabon, and I had actually done a large transect of the Uguay River in Gabon, largely inspired by Steve and team, but also by Mike Fay. And, at some point I got a WhatsApp message from Steve Boys saying, "Hey, do you want to go down the Zambezi?" And I thought, oh, that sounds like the coolest thing ever. So that's kind of how I joined the project. And what we're doing is really extraordinary. We have this huge, massive mobilization of scientists and teams. It's, probably the largest non-military mobilization in African history. And our goal is to survey all of Africa's great rivers between now and 2030. So we have teams in the field right now paddling down river systems. I've just gotten out of the field and I'm already preparing for my next expeditions. So it's, I have personally surveyed over 10,000 kilometers of river in Africa. And as a project, I think we're over 30,000 kilometers. So we have circumnavigated the globe on African river systems. And our goal is to study these river systems, figure out where the diversity is, what the diversity is. Are there threats? Are there impacts? Where are those localized on these river systems? And what can we do as scientists and conservationists to support the management and long-term conservation of these systems? So I've been lucky enough. I joined the project pretty early on, and I've had the chance to paddle all over Zambia, all over the Zambezi system, including some of its largest tributaries. I've done several of the big Okavango tributaries. I've spent a lot of time in eastern Angola, part of the world where very few people get to explore. And then I've just started getting my feet wet in the Congo Basin, both in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Central African Republic, so kind of the north and the south of the Congo Basin. And for a fish geek like me, there's almost nothing better, nothing more exciting than being in the Congo Basin, where there's so little knowledge and there is so much diversity. So I've been lucky. The last few years, I've had a lot of great adventures in really interesting and hard to access parts of Africa.
That's amazing. And just for our, sorry, one sec, Laurel, just for our listener, when we talk about this vast biodiversity, much of it, as Joe pointed out earlier, 25%, as much as 25% is undiscovered or unmapped. By finding new, more spots of biodiversity globally, we also know where to put conservation money to make sure that those places are protected. And that's why this type of work is so critical. And yeah, hats off to you all at the Wilderness Project. What an amazing project. Sorry, go ahead, Laurel.
Well, and Jeff, I was along the same lines. I was actually wanting to go up 30,000 feet and just why do we map? I mean, it's really interesting because to think about mapping, if you don't know what's there, you think it's empty and you could lose things before you even know what's there. So I'm just why even
Great
do
question,
this?
Laurel.
Yeah, so there's a really good example from the Chinko River where I just returned from. So that's part of the Congo Basin that's been really poorly studied. And so when the IUCN, one of these major groups that kind of guides conservationists, when the IUCN put together its report for freshwater biodiversity in Africa, the Chinko and the Upper Ubangi was flagged as one of the least diverse parts of the Congo Basin. It was in the range of 1 to 35 species. And that was simply because we didn't know what was out there. We went out there and we collected 90 species of fish in about a month. And that is not exhaustive. There are way more than 90 species in that system. So without this information, that area is not an important area for conservation. But now that we have the data and that we have mapped it and we say, actually, this area is quite rich, now we can focus conservation resources into those areas where previously it might have just been a blank on the map. And a lot of these areas that we're surveying are blanks on the maps. There are very few people studying freshwater ecosystems in Africa, very few ichthyologists out there. So very few people actually going, catching the fish, putting them in museums, studying the biodiversity. So we are filling massive gaps in the maps of our knowledge of biodiversity. And this is the case for the eastern Angolan highlands, northern Zambia, large parts of the Congo Basin, a surprising amount of Africa. We don't really know what's out there. So we get to be the people to map it all and put all that diversity on the map, which is really cool and exciting. And it's the groundwork for all subsequent conservation and management efforts looking forward.
That's amazing. I would just note one idea, and we might even cut this out, but are you connected to the trip down the Luangwa? I think it left 2 days ago.
Yes. Yeah.
The Luangwa River. Do you know James Kidd?
I do. Yes. Yeah, that's
James
our team.
is a dear friend of mine. Okay, so that's your team.
That's our team.
I can't believe you're not here, Jeff. I wish you were coming with us. I was like, no!
I will say, I think the Luangwa is going to be a very tricky expedition. It's got the highest density of hippos anywhere on the planet and is full of big man-eating crocodiles, and it's going to be a real hairy expedition.
Yeah.
And it's a long river. It's over 1,000 kilometers. I think it's 1,200 kilometers. So it's going to be a, multi-month expedition. And every single day you're sleeping been in a tent on the side of the river, and dodging the crocodiles and hippos as you paddle downstream. So my hat's off to those guys, to that team out there, because that is going to be a really incredible expedition.
That's amazing.
I'm curious how I want you to take us, just on one of your expeditions, and from the very beginning, how do you decide where to go?
Yeah. So, I think it's pretty easy to figure out what the biggest, most important river systems in Africa are. These are household common names: the Congo, the Nile, the Zambezi, the Okavango. But then you start looking at those river systems, and rivers are a bit like a tree. They've got all these branches getting smaller and smaller, leading off to the canopy. And what we do is, once we've surveyed the main stem, then we start taking the branches, the major tributaries of the river systems. So the Luangwa River is a major tributary of the Zambezi, as is the Kafue River, as is the Luanginga, which will be my next expedition. So once you've done kind of the main channel of the river, then you do its major tributaries, but also there are areas that you kind of know are going to be important. So maybe an area where there's a lot of human impacts, an area with a lot of mining impacts, for example. We want to know what's going on that river system. Are they affecting water chemistry? Is there a lot of heavy metal accumulation in that system? Are fisheries being affected? We also may target areas that are high biodiversity. So, areas where we know there's a lot of wetland birds, or areas that in the past there have been high diversity of fish surveys. We may want to target those areas. Or protected areas. Maybe, for example, African Parks is taking over Kundalungu National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It'd be really great and really valuable for us to get a survey of the Lufira River, so that now African Parks knows what they're working with as they take over management of this system. So there are lots of different reasons to study a river system. Once you've chosen your river, then it's a whole different thing, because you have to, the logistics of getting out to these areas and studying these rivers is insane. It's really easy to sit on a desktop and do satellite mapping, and that's kind of the first step. You map out the whole river system, you figure out where the rapids are, the gradient, what kind of boats maybe you're going to use. Maybe you're going to use inflatables because there's a lot of white water. Maybe you're going to use canoes because you need to carry a lot of equipment. So you make your choice on boats, you put together your big team, you fly out to these countries, then you have this, usually an incredibly long journey to make it to the river's start. So, in Angola, you fly into the coastal city of Luena. You might have 2 weeks of travel across Angola to get to the source of the Luanginga River. So you're traveling on these bush roads, sand roads, mud roads, burying your land cruisers, using the winches to get them out. In Angola, we actually have a 6-wheeled military vehicle, which is like the only thing that can get into the landscape in the rainy season. So you schlep out all your gear and you get out to the start of the river, you do your science around the source, and then you say goodbye to the cars and you start paddling downstream, hoping that you have remembered everything. And you just start paddling down the river. And as we go down the river, we want to document everything that we can. So you count every single bird you see, you count every single person, every house, every farm, every fishing net, every wild animal you see. So every single bit of data that you can collect, you can map that at the end. And you can say, where were the hippos? Where were the fishermen? Where were the crocodiles? And then as we go down the river, we're going to measure water chemistry every 10 kilometers. We're going to fly drones over so we can map the surrounding landscape. We've got 360 cameras up. So our scientific equipment is like a couple canoes worth of equipment, all packed up in their nice little pelican cases, organized. And then you've got food and camping stuff and all your boating stuff for a team of, potentially 10 or 20 people going down these rivers. And you've got your research lead, and you've got your camp lead, and you've got your expedition lead, and then you've got a couple land cruisers following you down the river with all the foodstuffs you might need, replacement equipment. The logistics is incredible. It is a bit like a military mobilization. But once you get onto the river, that's when I really start having fun. That's when you really fall into the rhythm and you become kind of part of the river. You're waking up with the calls of the birds every morning, and you could set your watch because you learn every moment that a different bird is going to start calling as the sun is rising. And you're up out of your tent, you're fetching your nets that have been out overnight, you're packing up all the research, quickly drinking a cup of coffee, eating, getting into your boats and starting your paddle. And we usually paddle, 8 hours a day. So one of the things that's less glamorous about my job is I paddle a lot. I have put in millions of paddle strokes down these river systems. And the whole time you're not checked out, you're not relaxing, you're not daydreaming, you are looking. You are counting every single thing and recording it. Some days you might be recording thousands of data points. So you are incredibly busy going down the river. Also busy scouting the water, looking for hippos, looking for crocodiles, looking for dangers, figuring out ways to get through the rapids. It's a handful. And finally, at the end of the day, you find a nice campsite, you pitch up your tents, and then the research really begins. Then you're busy all evening from, the moment you hit camp all the way until sundown. You eat a little bit, and then you grab your nets, and that's when I actually get to go out and catch fish. So usually my fish sampling is only done way in the middle of the night with a headlamp on, and I'm running around dodging the crocodiles with my nets trying to catch a few fish at the end of the day. But it's really busy, and you fall into this lovely rhythm. So within a week of being out on the river, you don't know whether it's Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. You've forgotten, that news and the outside world exists. You don't know what's happening. I'm a married man, but I call my wife maybe once a month when I'm out there because I am just so busy, so present, so engaged in the expedition, and every moment counts. You know that tomorrow you're going to be in a new place. You don't have the opportunity to go back upstream and study an area again. So every single day counts, every single moment counts in the field. And I'm a busy guy when I'm on expedition, but I love it. It's just my favorite thing in the whole world. And I'm lucky to spend about half of my year every year waking up in a tent alongside a river in a new spot, hopefully with fish in my net.
I wonder if you, when you're on these trips and you know that you can only do so much, you've got a limited time. I imagine that might be stressful, where you're, if I would have only been able to dip my net 4 more times, I could have actually verified if this was the species I was looking for or not.
Yeah, it's hard. There are certainly times where you sample and then the next day you sample again and you say, oh man, this is a totally different community. And all the fish I'm catching here are totally different than the fish I was catching yesterday. Something changed in the last 20 kilometers of river, and I can't go back and sample that area again. So you really do try to be proactive. You try to make the most of every opportunity you can. And if you happen to get to one of those sites that you think might be important, you spend extra time there. So on some of these river systems, maybe you have 1 or 2 waterfalls. You might have a flat river for 1,000 kilometers punctuated by these really distinct habitats. In those areas, I always try to stay a couple days because the fish living in a waterfall are going to be absolutely different than the fish living in slack water. And the water chemistry, the geology, the habitat, it's all going to be different. So in areas where you think, this is really unique, you just need to tell your boss, hey, I need an extra day here because you never know what you're going to find. And I've gotten better and better about identifying those areas as I've gained more experience. And I think that now I make fewer mistakes and miss fewer really cool stories now that I've done a bit more.
Those science stories are just fascinating. And I think, we can go over a couple of them in a minute, but you must, you mentioned that you're a married man. What kind of toll does this take on your personal life?
I'm really lucky. My wife is also a field biologist. She works for NOAA. And so she also...
Sorry, for our listeners, NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration
in
the United
Thank
States.
you. So she works on a research vessel. She works on a fisheries research vessel. So she also spends quite a bit of time away from home. We actually met in a laboratory with a bunch of dead fish on a table. So we were kind of made for each other, and we're pretty understanding and committed.
It's a match made in fishy heaven.
It's a match made in fishy heaven. And, she also has done a lot of work with me in Africa. She's done a lot of transect kilometers on African rivers. She has caught a ton of African fish. So she knows what I'm doing and knows who I am and what this does for me as a person. So she's incredibly encouraging, and I'm quite a lucky guy for that.
I mean, it's really intense. And for our listeners too, and for me, what is a transect versus an exploration?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, Laurel. I throw around the word transect all the time. And, a transect is basically, it's a research methodology. It's a way of studying how things change over distance. So you could, for example, you want to know how many bison are living in the plains in the Midwest. You could fly a plane in a straight line and you could count all the bison you see. And if you run these straight lines over and over and over again, you could mathematically calculate how many bison there are total and also map out where those bison are. So that's a really long transect. You could also do a really short transect. So in the rocky intertidal ecosystem where things change so quickly, maybe you have 10 meters from subtidal to upper intertidal, and you count all the organisms along that line, and you can say, all right, well, down here we've got these organisms, and a little further up we've got a different community. So it's a really standard tool that we use as scientists to categorize an ecosystem. And we, as the Wilderness Project, as freshwater ecologists, we do river transects. So instead of taking a straight line across an ecosystem, we are going to follow a river and we're going to document what we see along that river. And it allows us to understand really where biodiversity is, where people are, where impacts are. It's this really cool way to kind of understand how an ecosystem changes from where it begins up in its source area all the way down, and then where it reaches its confluence or its end, either in a lake, another river, or in the ocean. We use this idea of a transect in order to study really long ecosystems, really vast ecosystems. It allows us to say, well, actually, in 2026, this was the distribution of African buffalo on the Chinco River. And we actually know it. We have hard data. It allows us to understand how the ecosystem changes over space. And then if we repeat these surveys over time, that's the real kind of trick. If I go back in 10 years and I resurvey that system and I say, wow, there are 10 times as many buffalo and 15 times as many kudu. Well, suddenly we have really cool data to say this ecosystem is recovering. But on the contrary, if I go back and we see very little, then we say, oh, flag this, something bad is happening in this ecosystem. So it's not just valuable for understanding what's going on today, but it's a really valuable baseline for future studies so that we can monitor changes, impacts, and both positive and negative impacts on ecosystems.
And just as a note for our listeners, and this is important because that's the data that governments in Africa have not been able to collect in the past, often because of a lack of resources. So you all are supplying this data to the governments, potentially, as a part of their resource management program.
Exactly. So, we're a non-for-profit organization. We don't have the power to affect management decisions in these ecosystems. The people who do are the local governments, the national parks, the NGOs operating in those areas. So what we do, our role within the kind of conservation world is we collect the data that then informs management and conservation strategy. So we work really closely with the different management authorities in the countries where we work in. So whether this is the Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife, Department of National Parks, Department of Fisheries, water resource management authorities, hydropower developments or developers, all of these different organizations and bodies are managing these ecosystems, but they may not know what's going on in them. So we have the ability to go in and say, actually, this is where your fishing is. And this is the percentage of illegal fishing gear on this river system. This is where your wildlife is. This is where we saw evidence of poaching. These are really important data for managers. Now, I'm not going to go apprehend a poacher or an illegal fisherman. That's not my job. But I can collect that data, and then the national parks can go in and enforce their regulations. So we are basically the body who collects the data and inspires the conservation. That's our goal.
That's amazing. And it's important to also note that in the colonial history of Africa, rivers were often used as borders. So colonialists came to Africa, took over the continent, and then divided up the countries of Africa according to their own needs. And they often separated countries by rivers. But in the actual African milieu, there is this whole idea that rivers connect everyone. They are transport, they are where resources are accrued, they are often where there's large numbers of people living there as well. So there's a lot of people dependent upon rivers. And if you think about a river catchment in Africa, you're also looking at a people or a community who are often most exposed to anything that might happen to that river that could be negative. Could it be climate change or lack of rainfall or poor land use policy, deforestation, poaching, the wiping out of a fish species that people are dependent upon? So it's interesting that you all have chosen your transects on rivers. And I think that's fascinating. What do you think, Laurel?
I think it's really interesting because rivers are always changing and they change. If you stand there, they're changing, and they're changing as you move down them. They're changing in the seasons. I was caught by when you were talking about being on the river. I mean, I love camping and canoe camping, and it's just our favorite thing to do. You're right. This cycle of the birds, the cycle of the day, the cycle of how you live in that system. I want to know, on this most recent transect you did, how, what was it like? What was your favorite part, or how did it start? And also, I know you gave some hints of this, that different people have different roles also, because it seems like so much to do watching the river for where you're going. That observational aspect is really so exciting and
Like,
so
who
different.
doesn't want to go
so
down
jealous.
and count birds and look at cool wildlife? It's really fun and really cool. Laurel, I'm going to respond to yours. And then, Jeff, I do want to touch back upon kind of river systems and taking that 30,000 foot view on them. My most recent expedition, Laurel, was a really weird one, actually. Instead of having a big team, it was a team of two. It was actually just Mike Fay and I, and we went down the Chinko to get.
And just for our listeners, the legendary Mike Fay,
the
who
legendary
literally walked
Mike
across
Fay.
the Congo Basin. Amazing that you got to spend time with him.
For me, it was an incredible opportunity. I've known about Mike my whole career. Having worked in Gabon for the majority of my time in Africa, I've been in touch with Mike for a long time. He's kind of been a mentor of mine. So to have the opportunity to spend a month and a half one-on-one with him in the field was absolutely extraordinary.
And how did that even come about, Joe? How did it even get started?
So the Chinko
expedition
is in a kind of large Chinko wildlife reserve. It's this huge area in eastern CAR, and it's in the process of being converted into a national park. And Mike has been involved in that area for years and years and years. He kind of facilitated African parks getting involved into the Chinko landscape. And there had been a couple, short paddles on the Chinko, but Mike was like, I really want to do the whole thing. So he pushed the park managers to kind of allow him to do it. And of all the people in the world, I got the invite to tag along with him. So I kind of brought all the research and the research methodology that we do as the Wilderness Project and kind of tacked it on to a transect with Mike Fay. And so he and I paddled down the river. We had one boat. We took turns rowing down. And we did everything together. When we're observing wildlife, there's probably no one better at knowing the different monkey species in Central Africa than Mike Fay. Not only does he know every species, he knows their calls and he knows how to make those calls to call back to the monkeys. So every time we saw putty-nosed monkeys, he'd go like this, like kind of like a little kissing sound with his fingers. And the little putty-nosed monkeys would come out to the end of the branch and come have a look at us. It was extraordinary spending the time with Mike. So that was a really unusual trip. It is an incredibly remote, isolated area. That's one of the reasons we had a small team. Small plane flights to get out to the Chinco area, and then a helicopter drop to get us into the upper Chinco. So when you have logistics like that, you don't want a big team. You want a really small, experienced team. And we only had the opportunity to have 2 resupplies. So we had to pretty much carry everything we needed for a month and a half with us. So we had a loaded boat and had to have everything we needed. So the only thing I ran out of was toothpaste, but thankfully Mike had extra toothpaste to share. So it was an extraordinary expedition, very different from most of my other expeditions in that, Mike did a lot of the logistics and I got to just come along and be the science geek. And I had the opportunity to just go crazy on the fish. And, every single night I was out catching fish. So it was really great. And one of the cool things about the Chinco is it is known for monster fish, like for the really big, scary Congo fish, like the Goliath tigerfish and the massive catfishes. So we had the chance to catch some of these, monster fish on hook and line while we were out there. So I became the first person in history to catch a Goliath tigerfish on a 6-weight fly rod, which was a pretty exciting catch, to say the least.
How big was it?
It was 84 centimeters, so just under 3 feet long. It was not a monster. Mike got 105 centimeter one, and we saw Goliath tigerfish that were probably twice that size in the Chinco, but we just couldn't entice them. But it was unbelievable. I've never seen more big fish on a river in my whole life.
What accounts for that?
So the Chinco River is really well protected. It has been sparsely populated for a long time, both in pre-colonial days, but during the colonial period, it was all this big hunting concession. So there was very low human density, very low fishing pressure on the system. And then about 10 years ago, it was converted into a nature preserve. So there is no fishing allowed within the system. In that 10 years where there has been basically no take at all on the system, that ecosystem has recovered to a degree where I have never seen another African river system that is so healthy and so full of big fish and so full of diversity. All the fish that are susceptible to overfishing, they're all there in abundance. It was absolutely extraordinary. And to be able to compare that to other river systems in the area where there may not be any Goliath tigerfish remaining in those, there may not be any big Nile perch remaining in those ecosystems. They've just all been caught by fishermen, by gill nets. To see the contrast in the Chinco ecosystem was really eye-opening for me.
It's so interesting to think that it's possible that, because that system was able to recover, the lessons of that system could be translated out to other systems.
No, exactly. One of the big takeaways I've had studying these river ecosystems is without any protection, almost every river is overexploited. I have seen so much overfishing. I've seen so much pollution. I've seen so much river degradation. But in areas where there is protection, even terrestrial protection, not even thinking about the river, just protecting the land around the river, in those areas, you see a dramatic change in the river. The river recovers within kilometers of the start of a national park. You start seeing fish that were otherwise gone from the system. So conservation works and freshwater ecosystems recover. So even in an area where a system's been slammed, it's been degraded for a long time, you protect that river for 10 years. And you see a change, you see a recovery. I think another really good example right now is in California with the removal of the Klamath Dam. So this is a river in Northern California. It was dammed historically, and that blocked salmon migrations. The salmon population basically collapsed and was supported strictly by hatcheries. They removed the dams, and immediately, year one, salmon were making it back up that river and spawning in the river. So it is really incredible how freshwater ecosystems can recover if given the opportunity.
which is really encouraging to hear that.
It is. And I think maybe taking the step all the way back, Jeff, to your comment about rivers and watersheds and rivers used as boundaries. I think this is one of the tricky things when we think about freshwater conservation. If you think about a river like the Zambezi starts in Zambia. It goes into Angola. It goes back into Zambia. It becomes the border with Namibia and Zambia, Botswana and Zambia, Zimbabwe and Zambia. Then it flows into Mozambique. You think about how many different countries are involved in this watershed. If we want to keep the water clean in this river system, you need a lot of people buying into that. Anything that anybody does is going to flow downstream and affect people downstream. So the people in Mozambique are going to be affected by what's being done in Zambia and in Angola and in Botswana. For protecting these ecosystems, you really need transboundary collaboration. And that's one of the exciting things kind of in the Okavango Zambezi area. You have the CAZA, the Kavango-Zambezi Trans-Frontier Conservation Area. And this is this big multinational agreement where they all kind of share notes and they're trying to protect the landscape, the ecosystem level processes that span the Okavango and the Zambezi system. I think that's a really cool model and something that we're going to need to apply throughout other parts of Africa. And it's really tricky. You think about the Okavango system, which is such an important system in Africa, one of the hotspots of biodiversity and tourism. All of the water in the Okavango Delta comes from Angola. And it then flows into Namibia, and then it flows into Botswana and into the Delta. The Namibian section is incredibly impacted, but the Angolan section is almost pristine. So by protecting the entirety of the Angolan section, we are ensuring the livelihoods of not just the Okavango Delta, but folks living in Namibia as well.
Yeah, it's 1 million people are directly reliant on that ecosystem.
Exactly. And for example, the Angolans were going to say, hey, we're actually going to build dams all over this river system and we're going to use that water for irrigation. The downstream consequences would be catastrophic. So there is a need for communications and strategies to be at the watershed level rather than just thinking about your stretch of river in front of your house or in your nation. So it's tricky, but I do believe that these approaches work. And I think it's a really good strategy looking forward.
I think the Kavango transboundary system, so the Kavango-Zambezi Trans-Frontier Conservation Area, which is the CAZA Park, and this is something that our listeners can really get behind because it's very accessible. Victoria Falls is part of it. That's sort of the centerpiece. I had the pleasure in 2012 of doing a series of journalistic reports and my first documentary about it. But one of the things about that whole system is that they have also looked at political alliances that aren't just about like the farmers getting their water. You can get a visa to travel to the CAZA Park, and it's good in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Botswana now. And it's so accessible. So this is a place that has really benefited from these transboundary partnerships that are really centered upon the two great water systems of Southern Africa, the Zambezi and the Okavango. It's an incredible opportunity to be able to travel there. I was able to go there with Laurel once, and it was a fantastic trip.
And I should say that the kind of expeditions that you're doing, Joe, are key to getting that cooperation between others, because when you know what you have, you know what you can lose. And so I think that this is the base of all of that. I'm curious. I want to talk some specifics about like what are some of the coolest species that you've found, because I have to say, I am not a fish geek. I like fish. I've always liked fish, but I'm not really like that. And I'm just curious, like when you describe them, I'm like, ooh.
I kind of like the weird ones. I like the weird fish. Those are the ones that really kind of get me excited. One of my favorite fishes in Africa are the electric catfishes. Now, I don't know how many people know that there are electric catfishes in the world, but they are...
I was about to say, like, electric catfish?
Never heard of them.
They are super weird. They look like swimming sausages. They're little fat, pink, almost wrinkly things. They have this big layer of insulating fat around their body, and they have it because they produce really strong electric shocks. An electric catfish can produce 450 volts, which is plenty to chase a unwitting ichthyologist out of the water. And the moment you catch an electric catfish, it shocks you, and then you go,
Does it
yeah,
really?
yeah, totally. If you poke an electric catfish, you are going to be recoiling and shaking your hand. And that's the moment where I run over to all my other team members who aren't catching the fish, and I say, hey, go poke this fish. It's kind of a fun party trick. But, there are some...
And does it hurt? I mean, does it hurt? It's water conducting.
It's uncomfortable. It's
electricity.
uncomfortable. I mean, you cannot grab onto one of these fish. If it shocks you, you are letting go for sure. And the bigger they are, the more power they've got. So I love the electric.
And how big do they get?
Oh, they'll get like my forearm. It's a pretty substantial fish. And yeah, they're thick and they're strong, and they will chase you out of the water if you're in a hole with them. But I should say that's just kind of the weird and wacky. We are collecting totally unknown fish all the time. So last year, toward the end of last year, we went up into northern Zambia in the upper Congo Basin. So the furthest most source of the Congo rivers in Zambia, actually. So up in the Chambishi River system,
Chambishi, yeah, I've been there. Yeah,
Bengueulu. That's kind of the uppermost.
Bengueulu. Yeah.
Exactly. That's kind of the furthest source of the Congo. So we were surveying some river systems kind of in that area. And I had been alerted by another fish guy that, hey, there was a fish in an old collection caught in one of the tributaries of Lake Mweru. If you can, go out there and catch some more. So I had a couple ideas of places I wanted to go, and I went out there and I caught this fish, and it's a mormyrid. And mormyrids are also really funky looking fish. They don't look anything like a fish you've ever seen before. Some of them have these really long tubular snouts. Some of them have these big chins. They have these they look almost kind of like swimming torpedoes. They have this really elongate caudal peduncle, so the little area before the tail. And then they have this little almost club-shaped tail. They're really funny looking. If you've never seen a mormyrid...
Wait. Is that really a part of a fish, the caudal peduncle?
Yes, it is. It is. It's a fun word, too, isn't it?
It's a great word. Oh, my God.
Yeah. So these mormyrids, they're fascinating. If you've never seen one, you should just look up a mormyrid, Google it. But what's amazing about mormyrids, they are considered the smartest fish in the world. They have massive brains. They actually have, compared to their body size, a larger brain than a human. Just let that sink in for a moment. It's a fish with a bigger brain compared to its body than a human's brain for a human. And
these are thinking fish.
These are thinking fish. They are, what's amazing about them is they not only are thinking, but they are talking. So these fish have a language, and we can clue into it. So they're not talking with sound, they're talking with electricity. So these are considered weakly electric fishes, and they produce this little tiny pulse of electricity, almost like a bat uses sound, like sonar. So they're shooting out these little pulses of electricity, and then their bodies are covered in electroreceptors. So they've got an electric field around them as they're swimming, and they can sense what's going on around them. So they can sense their environment, they can navigate based on it, but they can also talk to each other. So each species has its own call, its own waveform. And so every species you can distinguish based on its
You're
dialect.
saying that its own electromagnetic waveform, just like you would send a radio broadcast to somebody who was tuned into your radio station.
Exactly. So each species has its own call, but then males and females are slightly different, and they can modulate the calls in a way so that a male can say, hey, it's breeding season and I'm guarding this territory. Or, they could be feeding together, and they could be hunting, saying, ooh, fish just went off this way, come over here. And they all go and feed together in the same spot. So they're really incredible, fascinating fish. And this language is really critical because it is species specific. If you record the call, it's as good as its genetics to distinguish the species. So I went off into these headwater tributaries of Lake Mweru, and I caught this fish, and it is so different from any other mormyrid we've ever seen. We know that it's a new genus of fish. We are not even we don't even know what to even call it in our manuscripts. So we're in the process of doing a whole genome sequence so we can place it in the tree of life. We can figure out where it nests. And then we're going to be able to describe a new genus of mormyrid. And for folks who don't know, new genera of vertebrates don't come along every day. And that's the type of discovery that we're making on these expeditions. It's really extraordinary that in an area that, is accessible in a politically stable country where you can just drive up to the river, you're still finding new genera that have never been described by scientists. It's really extraordinary.
You're discovering new genera of talking electromagnetic fish that have the biggest brains of any fish species in the world for body size.
Exactly. And these are the types of things that I love about freshwater fish. It's like, who would have thunk it that out in the rivers of Africa, you've got these ingenious fish cruising around having full conversations. It's absolutely amazing.
Soon we'll need AI to pull their language out, just like they've done for the sperm whales. Apparently, we're going to have those people on, Laurel. By the way,
but there's going to be some,
and the elephants. They've been doing it on elephants. Yeah.
I think these fish would be really well suited for it. And as early as the 70s, actually, we were able to record male breeding calls. It wasn't me. I was not born at the time. But in the 70s, we were able to go and play male breeding calls in rivers and attract in females. So we've already started the conversation with mormyrids. And I'm sure that within the next few years, we'll be having whole conversations.
I wonder if they have good literature.
I'm curious on the logistics of that. Like how did you know, like how did you pick up on those fields? How did you notice that? What equipment are you using that you could tell while you were physically still there, not taking information back to the lab to analyze, but that you were onto something?
To a large degree, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. So I did not discover that these fish were using electricity to communicate. That was a whole nother lab group. Carl Hopkins and his whole group have really pioneered that work. And I was lucky that working in Gabon, one of my early mentors was a guy named John Sullivan. And he is kind of like the mystery mormyrid man. Like, this is what he loves. It's his passion. And he was the one who clued me in that, there might be something weird up there in the upper Mweru system. So he helped me set up my equipment, it's basically a digital oscilloscope. So if you were a guitar player and you needed an amplifier, I buy a guitar amplifier. And then I strip it down and I make electrodes to stick in the water rather than plugging in a guitar. And then I can, stick those electrodes into the river and amplify it. And I can actually hear the fish talking.
What does it sound like?
Well, it sounds like a series of clicks, and it's louder if they're closer.
That sounds like your neighbor in New York talking in their apartment.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like they're singing whole songs here. I guess the interesting thing about the mormyrids is they can't really modulate their call, right? What they can do is they can modulate the gaps in between their calls. So mormyrids don't say dit, dit, dit to say hello. They might say dit, dit and pause for a second and then go dit, dit to say, okay, actually this gap in communications is me, a fish, and this is my signal. So they actually communicate with gaps in their calling rather than the constant kind of pulsing. The constant pulsing is more for orientation, navigation.
You're saying that it's like what the talking electromagnetic fish don't say has all the information in it.
Exactly. It's an incredible system, and I would highly recommend people digging into mormyrids. There's a whole website dedicated to just how cool mormyrids are. Anybody who's interested in digging into that group, that is one of the most incredible groups of fishes, and they're certainly among my favorites. And they're so diverse. It's really extraordinary, and they're only in Africa. So I feel very lucky to have the chance to have interacted with so many of them in the field.
Where are you going next?
So my next trip is on the Luanginga River in eastern Angola. So this is it's a tributary of the upper Zambezi, and it flows from the Angolan water tower, this really unique area. It's this highland area in eastern Angola that was just recently declared a world Ramsar site, so a wetland of international importance. And it's this massive tower of peat and sand, and there's a lot of rainfall there, and it just fills these aquifers with water, and that feeds the Okavango system. It feeds the Zambezi system. A lot of the water for the region actually just sits in those sands. And so the Luanginga is not the first tributary to the Upper Congo from the Angolan side, but it's, I think, the third one down, third major one. And it's going to be a really interesting system because it's way out there. It's way in the middle of nowhere. There's very little development on the Angolan side. It's going to be extremely pristine. I expect that this river is going to be crystal clear, that we're going to be able to see and identify the fish as they swim by. And we're going to take it, from its source all the way down to the Angola-Zambia border. And then another team's going to be sitting there on the other side of the border, and they're going to take it down to the Zambezi channel, kind of continuing our transect. And they actually may have the cooler part of the river because the Luanginga flows through the Barbee floodplains, which is like one of the 4 great floodplains in southern Africa. It is this massive bulb on the Zambezi. It's like 400 kilometers long, 200 kilometers wide, and it's just this massive floodplain system with unbelievable bird density. I have never seen so many open-bill storks in one place. We counted a breeding group with over 12,000 individuals in the Barbee floodplains. So that is a really special place, and I hope that our colleagues have the opportunity to see those open-bill, because it was extraordinary when they took off, the sound of their wing beats was almost deafening. It was just extraordinary.
It's interesting when this is a place that has also been preserved. The Barbee people, they move their summer palace where the king stays for one part of the year. And as the floodplain fills up, then they move him back in a ceremony every 6 months or 7 months called the Kuomboka. And they paddle these zebra-painted canoes with the king on them. And people can come and be a part of the journey and really get to know the people who've actually made sure that floodplain remained as pristine as it is now. I had a really amazing time staying on the banks of the Zambezi there with the folks from not just that tribe, but 2 others. And it was one of the most amazing expeditions of my life. Yeah. It's a beautiful place.
The Barbee is really special, and we've been very lucky. Before we surveyed the Barbee, we had the chance to go and meet the king, the Barbee king, and he has been incredibly supportive and encouraging of the work that we've done. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is not only are we working with, the government administration, but we're working with traditional administration as well in a lot of these areas to kind of support conservation efforts. And I think that is really powerful. And I think it's really important. And that's a really great example of it, where we've got community buy-in to help manage and protect this incredible and important wetland ecosystem. And it's a relationship that I'm really glad we have built. And I, look forward to continuing to stay engaged with the king there. It's a really cool thing to have the opportunity to meet a real live king and to make your pitch for protecting his important land. So really cool stuff.
I'm curious on the scientists. Are you also involved in helping young scientists, young African scientists, do this work? And what happens when you're not there?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think we try to do a lot of, and I try to do particularly, is mentor the next generation. So we work pretty much every expedition. We've got either a student from a local university, or we've got representatives from the government ministries who work on these ecosystems. And, one of my great joys has been able to kind of mentor younger scientists. So we have, a whole student program within the Wilderness Project where we bring on students and we give them this opportunity to have a field experience. But also we help them decide what they want to do as a scientist. And we may even support their master's or PhD work. So we've got students who are, doing their master's based on data they collected on a transect they did with us or did with me in some scenarios. And I find it really, really gratifying to take someone who, maybe has never been in the field before, has never slept in a tent, doesn't know how to swim, and has never paddled a boat. And, take them from a complete noob and get them safely down 1,000 kilometers of river, and get them so comfortable in a tent, so comfortable in a canoe, so comfortable doing field work and field science. And then having the opportunity to kind of wrap it all up and have a scientific publication at the end of it. That's the whole process. And to be able to mentor someone kind of from start to finish is really gratifying. And it's one of my favorite things about the work I do is being able to mentor people. And as one of the more experienced researchers within the Wilderness Project, I get the chance to mentor almost everybody. So I get sent out there with a person who's never been in the field, and I get told, all right, Joe, bring them up to speed real quick. So it's a challenge, but it's also really, really rewarding.
That's fantastic. And how do people support your work? Give us a little bit of the breakdown of how people can help, and we'll make sure that, as usual, we'll have all these links in the show notes so people can just click on them and drop you some cash or a like or something and make sure that the projects that you guys are working on get funded into the future.
Yeah. So, we are a non-for-profit organization. We take donations. So the Wilderness Project takes donations if you've got spare cash. There are other organizations working in Africa that do a lot of really great freshwater conservation work. So, thinking about a system like the Chinko system, it's not well protected because of the Wilderness Project. It's well protected to a large degree because of the work African Parks has been doing there. So I think, supporting a conservation organization that you trust and care about, I think that's a really great way to support freshwater conservation. I think looking kind of beyond what I do, I think that freshwaters globally are really important. So if you want to help freshwater conservation, you don't need to think about how you're going to help a river in Zambia. I think looking really locally is also really important. So you have a local stream or a local lake near you. Go take a stroll along the river. Maybe do a trash pickup. That's a good way to kind of get more involved with your river system. If you've got
maybe there's people who are already working to protect that river system in your local area.
Certainly.
And you can join them.
Yeah, a lot of rivers have Friends of X River. So there are lots of local organizations doing these kind of things, doing cleanups. I think if you're a teacher, get your students out there, get them involved in freshwater ecosystems. There's nothing cooler than a freshwater lab for a biology class. I mean, you can look at everything from bacteria and microscopic species, all the, water chemistry, human impacts, large-scale biodiversity. I mean, there's so much cool stuff in aquatic ecosystems. And if you're a parent, take your kids out. For me, I grew up fishing. To me, fishing was the kind of the key that opened my world into the fish world. So buy a fishing license if you want to get out fishing, or you know what? Even if you don't want to fish, buy a fishing license, because the money you spend for your fishing license actually goes to conservation. Like, it is one of the best ways to directly say, I want to invest in conservation. Here's my annual fishing license fees for my state. And you know that your money is going to go to conservation efforts in your backyard. I think that's a pretty easy way to do it. And I know I got hooked on fish at a really young age. So the more we can hook
I see
people,
what you did there.
No pun intended. I've been a fish person longer than I can remember. I just didn't know you could be a fish professional. I never thought I could make a career out of this. And so I think exposing people to kind of the cool opportunities that you can have being a biologist and being a fish geek, kind of following your passion, I think that's a really good way to bring the next generation on board. And I think that's really critical.
And that's not just a fish story.
Not just a fish story.
I think we can't top that. So I'm going to say thank you so much, Joe. This was, I could talk to you all day. And I'd love to, when you come back adventure. You have so many stories and are finding such cool things. It's really increased my enthusiasm of freshwater ecosystems and fish in general and my knowledge. And it's also interesting to see how connected we are and how easy it is to support freshwater systems in our own backyards as well as in these exotic locales. And I just find it all so interesting. And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks. And so I'm in Johannesburg. So anytime you need somebody to jump, I can do pretty much everything in the bush. So, if you're a man short or a girl short, I can take the place of either.
That sounds great. Well, I'll add you to the list. And we do have storytellers with us on most of our expeditions. That's another major focus of what we do is getting this out there. So there might be a spot for you. You never know, Jeff.
Well, wow, what an incredible conversation, Laurel. And a huge shout out to Joe Cutler for joining us today and sharing so many amazing fish. And special, wow, what an incredible conversation, Laurel. And a huge shout out to Joe Cutler for joining us today and sharing so many amazing fish tales with us. If you want to help support the Wilderness Project, where Joe Cutler works in Africa, please visit the show notes for how to donate. If you want to support rivers, freshwater ecology, and organizations closer to your home, we have links there too. Or, as Joe said, buy a fishing license, or get online and find out who is supporting your local river and get involved. The easiest way to support this podcast is to share, subscribe, and follow, and rate us if at all possible. It really does help us. If you were moved by the story of the electric fishes that talk using radio signals, tell your friends and family about what you heard and where you heard it today. Thanks for listening. Together, we can help sustain this wonder-filled world. If you were moved by the story of the electric fishes that talk using radio signals, tell your friends and family about what you heard and where you heard it today. Thanks for listening. Together, we can help sustain this wonder-filled world. An eye on my phone, and I hope to get your call, Joe. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
No, thank you guys so much. And I really appreciate it. And, I will say, if you do come, Jeff, be aware there are hippos and there are crocodiles, and it can be nerve-wracking and it can be scary, but, I've got all my fingers and toes still. So
yeah, I was actually trained in South Luangwa National Park as a game guide.
All right,
and worked as one for 11 years.
There you go.
So I managed not to be killed by the crocodile that killed the person who I only found out later I replaced at the lodge.
Yikes. Well, they're the real deal.
I know. Well, they had his arm in the freezer, but that's a story for another time.
Golly.
Always learning something. I knew about the game guy, but I didn't know about who you replaced.
Wow. What an incredible conversation, Laurel. And a huge shout out to Joe Cutler for joining us today and sharing so many amazing fish tales with us. If you want to help support the Wilderness Project, where Joe Cutler works in Africa, please visit the show notes for how to donate. If you want to support rivers, freshwater ecology, and organizations closer to your home, we have links there too. Or, as Joe said, buy a fishing license, or get online and find out who is supporting your local river and get involved. The easiest way to support this podcast is to share, subscribe, and follow, and rate us if at all possible. It really does help us. If you were moved by the story of the electric fishes that talk using radio signals, tell your friends and family about what you heard and where you heard it today. Thanks for listening. Together, we can help sustain this wonder-filled world.